Welcome to March. And of course, with March comes March Madness, which means a lot of people for the first time are going to get a look at some of the NBA draft prospects for this upcoming NBA draft. Of course, the 2022 NBA draft. I've been hyping it up all year long. I think this is going to be a phenomenal draft class. Not only is it really rich at the top with 4 really great players, but I also think there's going to be a ton of other ancillary pieces that can come in and make a ton of big plays in the NBA. I think this class could even have up to maybe 8 or 10 All-Stars. It is an extremely deep, talented, good draft class, and I'm really excited to be bringing you guys my second official big board here on the channel. My first one was up a few months ago. This one now is a little bit more refined. I think I've really cleaned up some of the back end pieces as we've had more time to really assess some of these college players, also some of the guys overseas as well will make debuts in here too. So there's a lot to break down in this big board. And for this big board, I want you guys to leave a like and subscribe because these are my top 30 prospects as of March 2nd, 2022. Of course, March 2nd is the day that Wilt Chamberlain scored 100 points, and it's also near the beginning of March. So I thought today would be a perfect day to talk about the NBA draft, how much these guys could make a difference for the next 10 years of the NBA. It's insane. So if you guys are excited about the NBA draft, if you're excited about these prospects, leave a like on today's video, subscribe if you're new. We're trying to get to 7,200 subscribers. Let's see if we can do that after this video. Moving forward now, I'm going to start with an honorable mention here, and it's a player I did not rank in this one that I think could really easily slide up into my top 30, perhaps my top 20. That's Ron Harper Jr. out of Rutgers. Defensively, he's a mastermind. He can move his feet very, very well. He's a little bit bulkier, stands about 6'6", 245 pounds. You see his broad shoulders, and he's the son of a former top-tier defensive guard in the NBA, Ron Harper, who used to play for the Chicago Bulls. Ron Harper Jr. carries some of those same defensive elements. He's a little bit bigger, though. And one area he's really grown this year with Rutgers from his years past with the program is his ability to create for himself. He's become a pretty solid mid-range shot creator, and I think he's a player who maybe he doesn't go in the first round, but for me, I would have him probably as a first-round level player. I didn't rank him in this video just because I need to see a little bit more, and I think the tournament's going to be huge for them. Rutgers, of course, did have 3 upset wins over top 10 teams in the nation, and then they fell a little bit short to Purdue, but Ron Harper Jr., he's a big part of what they do, and I think he's going to be a player I really like, but at this point, I don't have him ranked in this video. I will in the future, though. Moving on now to my 30th ranked prospect, and we're going to get it started off here with Bryce McGowens, a freshman out of Nebraska, and he's got some interesting upside to him, especially when you consider the fact that he is a 6'7" guard who can handle the ball a little bit, can also create for himself into the mid-range area specifically, and it has a little bit of bounce to him as well. I think he's actually an underrated athlete. He actually has pretty solid vertical athleticism and is someone who, with his handle and his ability to create for himself, you put him in an NBA system with a little bit more spacing around him, give him a couple more years to put on a little bit of weight and develop, and I could see him being an intriguing player down the road. A player I liken him to quite often is Chris Middleton of the Milwaukee Bucks. They've got similar frames, similar skill sets, and I think what Bryce McGowens can bring to the NBA is something like what we've seen Chris Middleton bring, who himself, he was a former second-round pick and is now an NBA champion. Maybe Bryce McGowens doesn't have that high-term upside to him, but I do think he is someone who down the road could help an NBA team, especially with the right development track around him. Right now, some of the issues with him, though, is that offensive consistency. Part of those flaws come because of his inability to consistently play through contact. Like I mentioned, he is a little wiry, not the biggest frame in the world in terms of, you know, his width and his strength at this point. I think he's going to have to get into an NBA strength development program pretty quickly. And he's going to have to figure out what the gym looks like. So he needs to spend a little bit of muscle. And then he also, I think, has to have better coaching around him. Fred Hoiberg's been his coach at Nebraska. The Cornhuskers announced that they do want to bring him back, keep him around. But it's been a tough ship there in Nebraska. They've struggled to win games. Bryce McGowens is doing everything he can, doesn't have a lot of talent around him, though. So I don't really want to knock him for some of his own inefficiencies, because I think part of it is the coaching and utilization and also the recruiting of other talent around him. Bryce McGowens is clearly the best player on that team, and I don't think there's a ton of talent around him that's really helping him succeed. So I think at this point, you know, he's a player who I could see going in the late 20s, maybe in the early 30s as well into the second round. He's a talented player, though, for me, and I think back into the first round does make a lot of sense for McGowens at this point. Moving into 29, my 29th ranked prospect, I got MarJon Beauchamp here, and I think this is going to be a surprise to a lot of people. I know MarJon Beauchamp, someone who Other people look at it as maybe a lottery level pick. I just don't see that. What I do see is a really solid physical wing who can play pretty well on both ends of the floor. And the biggest thing with him is, outside of his physicals, is his progression track. Was playing at a lower level, was not a D1 level athlete, and has really improved himself to becoming a G League level player and someone who can hold his own at that level. Now, I think for him, I don't know if there's a ton of upside, because I don't see him being a really good playmaker. And I don't see him becoming a great three-point shooter. What I do see from him, though, is competitive and someone who wants to make winning plays. He's got a solid offensive blend. You can use him with the ball a little bit, but really fits well without the ball. Is a solid cutter. I think that's really been where his improvement this year with G League Ignite's been spotted, as he cuts off the ball extremely well. Again, with his progression track, it's hard to bet against a kid who continues to just get better year in, year out. Maybe you put him into an NBA roster and quickly he starts finding minutes because he's going to do what a coach asks, and he's going to play hard. And I think that's something that there is going to be a lot of value from NBA executives for a guy like MarJon Beauchamp, who has a good physical frame as well. Moving into 28, I've got Wendell Moore Jr. here, another intriguing player for me, simply because I think he's really well-rounded. He's a junior at Duke. He's got a really good frame to him as well, as 6'6", probably around 225 pounds. He can shoot the three ball well. He's shooting over 40% from three this year on about 3 attempts a game. He can play through contact. He's a really solid playmaker. Actually, that's where a lot of his improvement this season's come, jumping up to 4 assists a game. He's not a high usage guy, but he's still very efficient when it comes to moving the basketball around, finding the open guy, getting his teammates involved, and also finds a good scoring blend himself. I think he's going to be a very nice pickup piece. In the open, I talked about ancillary players. Wendell Moore Jr. is one of those guys. You put him on a roster, probably 7th or 8th man to start off in his NBA career, and he's just going to make winning plays. And I think there's a lot of value to that. If you're a contender and you can add a guy like Wendell Moore Jr. in, it helps a ton. I could see him being a guy like a Memphis Grizzly right now, or the Oklahoma City Thunder. You know, they have the Phoenix Suns pick late in the first round. Teams like that need help, need players that can help them. Whether you're a contending team or a team that's rebuilding, if you can bring in solid players, especially outside the lottery, like what Wendell Moore Jr. is going to be, you know, maybe the floor isn't, or the floor's really high, but the ceiling's not super high. There's still value there. So I don't know what his upside's going to be. I think he's got to be a little bit quicker with the basketball, especially when he's attacking downhill. But for me, Wendell Moore Jr., I think he's a really solid player in 28th. I think it's a very fair ranking for him, just with what we've seen from him in his junior campaign. Moving into 27, I've got Blake Wesley here, another very interesting player, similar to the Bryce McGowens situation, but he's more of a true lead guard. And the thing with him at Notre Dame is he's doing a ton of the work again, except he's finding some pretty good success with it. His efficiencies aren't phenomenal, but what he is a self-creator who is extremely confident. His confidence levels are off the chart. Any shot he takes, he believes is the best shot that his team can get. And there's some real upside here with him. A player that you could compare him to a little bit is Cam Thomas, who did a lot of that at LSU himself. Of course, Will Wade, best known for not being the X's and O's guys, but letting his guys run isolation and pick and roll. Blake Wesley, he has that do-it-myself potential. That's what I'm calling it with him. He's been carrying Notre Dame this year, and I think put him on an NBA roster with a little bit more spacing. It's very interesting with his handle, his shot creation upside. Maybe in a couple of years, we could see him take massive strides and become a starting level guard in the league. Right now, though, my questions are, what's his deep range look like? Can he shoot the three ball consistently? He definitely needs to find a little bit more efficiency as a scorer. And then how does he involve others, averaging just a little bit over 2 assists a game? I know he's not playing with the most talent, but when you're playing with the ball in your hands most of the time, I feel like you have to find a way to average more than 2 assists a game. He currently isn't doing that. But again, the upside's there with shot creation. Shot creation. That's one of the most important assets to have as a lead guard. He has that element to his game. It's all about trying to tighten it up now, get more reps in, and really tighten up that efficiency. 26th, I've got Jean Montero here playing for Overtime Elite. And of course, that's the big, fun league that, is taking the world by storm, or was at least supposed to. He had Agent 00 commentating in that one. What he's really good at is when the ball's in his hands, involving others, he's got a very good handle. The ball's on a string. I think he's someone who could be a lead guard in the NBA because of his ability and his confidence as a ball handler, playmaker for others. He's going to be flashy too. He's going to be fun to watch in the NBA. He's very, very intriguing as a facilitator. My questions, though, is he's playing for the Overtime Elite League, and so far that league has not impressed me. Feels a little bit like a lifetime YMCA pickup game more than what the college and NBA scene looks like in terms of X's and O's, schematics, help defense, that kind of stuff. I think that Overtime Elite's a little bit more casual, which makes, your life as a facilitating guard way easier. If you're going to have the ball in your hands, it's going to be way easier to get your teammates involved if help defense just isn't quite what it's supposed to be. And I think there's going to be some questions about that as well from NBA executives. They're going to say, well, he's kind of in the startup league that's a little bit different. It's not quite the same level of competition as the collegiate game. I know he's playing with other good talent. The issue is really, how does talent get honed? When you're in a system, that talent gets really mixed together well. That's why a guy like Michael Beasley in his NBA career just didn't really pan out the same way that, he would in pickup runs, for example. So I've got question marks about Jean Montero's ability to score the basketball. Also, what his defensive impact's going to be, because he's a little bit smaller guard, maybe not the most athletic guy in the gym either. So for me with Jean Montero, he's fun, he's intriguing. I still have him as a top 30 prospect at this point, but I do think he's going to get dinged based on where he's playing currently. Moving into 25, Patrick Baldwin, a player who I got to watch quite a bit for USA U19 World Cup in their run to the gold medal last year. And I'm lower on Patrick Baldwin than most. Let's be honest about it here. He's a 6'10" wing who has really good shooting touch. He's going to shoot the ball extremely well from three in the NBA. I think he's someone who has NBA range on day one. He's going to be confident and competent as a shooter. My only questions for him are pretty much every other aspect of basketball. Doesn't dribble the basketball well, doesn't have a lot of athletic bend in his game. And he's also not very assertive around talent. Watching him back with USA U19 World Cup en route to gold, he came off the bench on that team. So, that team was stacked. There was a lot of talent there. But the fact that he wasn't in the starting five already kind of shows you what coaches felt about him just amongst those players. And then also didn't really play a ton off the bench. And when he did, he played exclusively without the ball. Didn't look comfortable putting the ball on the deck. Didn't look comfortable really being the guy. So for me, Patrick Baldwin, sure, the height and length and shooting ability should be intriguing to teams. But really, when you watch this kid play, I don't know. Right now, he's playing for Milwaukee against lesser competition. I totally understand why he went there, with his dad being there and everything. But at the same time, for me with Patrick Baldwin, I think you can't really look at him as a top 20 prospect with some of the holes in his game. Kind of reminds me of Davis Bertans a little bit, who infamously in Washington, before getting traded to Dallas, just didn't guard anybody. So I think Patrick Baldwin's going to have some similar issues. Also not very capable of putting the ball on the deck for more than one dribble. So for me, Patrick Baldwin, I just don't buy into him as much as other people do. I know this is a little low compared to where other people are going to see him. But I think this is a very fair ranking just based on the level of competition he's playing against, what he's looked like, for USA U19 World Cup qualifiers and their championship run. And then also just with what I've seen from him as a player on film. 24th, I've got Julian Strawther here, and he's actually kind of the opposite of a guy like Patrick Baldwin because he is a very intriguing player who kind of does a lot of things fairly well. He has taken a massive step forward in his sophomore season at Gonzaga, never started as a freshman, and has become a huge piece for them this year, playing alongside Chet Holmgren, Andrew Timme in the front court. And I think the biggest thing for him is what he can do off the ball, because that's a really desired role for a ton of teams in the NBA. They're looking for players who can play alongside stars, and Julian Strawther is a perfect example of this. He's capable as a playmaker. He's capable of attacking closeouts. He's capable of spacing out to the three-point line. He just does a lot of stuff well. He's a good cutter, times his cuts well, makes himself available for passing lanes. And defensively, he's going to put a lot of effort in. He's going to work hard. He's got a good NBA body. He's going to have some solid length. He's got good physicality to him. Now, upsides to the question here. Of course, you see my areas to improve here as ball handling and self-creation. Doesn't do a ton of that for himself. I think if he develops a little bit more of a consistent pull-up game in the mid-range area, that helps him attack closeouts a little bit better, especially against rim protection at the NBA level. But for me, Julian Strawther, he's someone who continues to gain steam. I think he can continue climbing boards. For me, I think I have him higher than a lot of other people do at this point as a first-round level player. Other people, I think, see him as an early second-round guy. But I think Julian Strawther is someone who on other people's boards is going to continue moving up. I have him in the 20s right now, and I think that's really ultimately where he probably ends for a lot of people. 23, J.D. Davison out of Alabama, a player who I was super excited for and I thought I was going to be higher on coming into this collegiate season. Of course, he's a freshman at Alabama, and boy, is he athletic. He's one of the fastest, most powerful athletic guards in this year's class. He can get downhill in a hurry, and when he does, he's going to yam it on somebody. He did it against Walker Kessler against Auburn, one of the most famous dunks from college basketball this season. And he's also someone who in the pick and roll can get an offense organized. He's shown ability to be a lead guard for a team. Now, Alabama's been really interesting this year. They've beaten some really good teams and have lost to some really bad teams. So, take that as you will with J.D. Davison. For me, though, the upside's clearly there with his ability to get to the rim and finish. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Tyrese Maxey. I don't think he's as quick, though, with the ball, and I don't think he's as skilled as a finisher. I think he's just more of a power finisher than Tyrese Maxey is. But when you look at what he needs to improve on, and this is really where the separation is between him and Maxey, Maxey's a lot more talented in the half court in terms of a scoring standpoint. J.D. Davison, I don't know how much he implements himself into the half court, especially when he's outside of the pick and roll. Does he have the handle to beat guys off the dribble consistently? And does he have the skill set to score the ball on the perimeter consistently? I don't think he does at this point, which is why a player who I thought was going to be a lottery level pick before the season started. You can look back at my way too early mock draft. After the draft last year, I thought J.D. Davison could be a top 10 pick possibly. When you look at his athleticism and some of the clips I'd seen from him in high school, just hasn't really panned out the same way at Alabama that I had thought it could. So for me, I have him in the 20s right now. March Madness is right around the corner, so maybe he plays himself up. But at this point right now, I see him in the 20s. 22, Kennedy Chandler, a player again who I thought was going to be a way higher, was a huge part of the USA U19 World Cup championship team. Started for them as well. He was one of the primary ball handling guards for that team, and he's a pesky defender who's going to pick up 94 feet, and he's got really good quickness to him, and I think he's going to be able to use that quickness to his advantage, knife through defenses, and play make for others. The issue again for me here with him, though, is how does he translate his penetration and his quickness into scoring? Because at this point, he's not going to be a great scorer. I think he's averaging about 12 points a game right now for Tennessee. He's been a good player for them, don't get me wrong, but he's someone who I thought was going to have a little bit more impact in terms of winning than he has at this point. And I thought he's got the skill set to score the basketball, because I thought he was going to be quicker with the ball than a ton of other people defensively are going to be able to keep up with. However, he just hasn't implemented himself in that way yet. Maybe there's some hope that he can get there. Guards like him who are a little undersized but quick tend to work out fairly well in the NBA. Actually, I think quickness is one of the most underrated assets for smaller guards, especially with their ability to get to the rim. Drive and kick game is going to be lively for Kennedy Chandler. He's a good playmaker. But for me, shot creation, three-point shooting, that's the common theme here for some of these guards. If you can't shot create or hit the three ball consistently, your value in today's modern NBA is a little questionable. So even though Kennedy Chandler does a lot of things well, some of the things he doesn't do great at this point do become real question marks for me. 21, Trayce Jackson-Davis here, a junior from Indiana. I love this kid's game. He's a player who I could see being a top 15 player from this class, or a player who I could see not being worth drafted this year, just because of how a team would use him and how a team would try and fit him into their roster. For me, he should be a small ball center. He should be a 5 all the time. I don't see any fit with him being a 4 unless you have a really good floor spacing 5 next to him. His best assets are weak side rim protection, athleticism, rim running, pick and roll, roll man. That's what he does best. He's very, very solid in those areas. You want to bring him up, use him as a screener, let him slip. You can get him the ball in the mid post, let him pass out of the post. He's got a really good skill set in those areas. I think the perfect fit for him would be in Golden State, Golden State knows how to utilize a big like Trayce Jackson-Davis. They'll utilize his athleticism well. They'll utilize his mid-roll to the paint well. And I think he's someone who, you give him some reads, he's going to be able to make the correct pass. And then also his rim protection would be very valued there. The issues for him, though, is his offensive versatility. He just doesn't shoot the ball at all right now. 0.1 attempts a game this year, which is 1 attempt all season long, and he missed it. So for Indiana right now, he's played the 5 fairly frequently, and he's been really successful in that area. And I don't think an NBA team can overthink this and try and playing him at the 4 unless you have a really good shooting big man at the 5. For example, Nikola Jovic or Karl Anthony Towns in Minnesota. Those places would make sense for Trayce Jackson-Davis to play a little bit of the 4. But other than that, I mean, if you have a traditional center, Trayce Jackson-Davis is just not going to be a good fit next to them. Moving on to 20, Carlos Alocen here plays overseas. He's a Spanish-born player, and he's got some serious strengths to him that I am in love with. Think Ricky Rubio here when you consider Carlos Alocen. He's a smooth playmaker who has a lot of flair and flash to his game. There's a ton of entertainment value here with this selection if a team takes Carlos Alocen in round 1. My guess is he probably goes in round 2, but I'm higher on him than most because he's a bigger guard at about 6'5". He's got really good feel in the pick and roll. Not only can he read the roll man well and deliver it to him, he can also read opposite corner, can also read opposite wing. He is a very distinguished and well-ready playmaker at the NBA level. And he's also got a pretty good skill set finishing the basketball around the rim. Even though he's not the most athletic guy, he's probably not going to punch it home a ton. What he is going to do is find angles and areas that he can penetrate into and still finish the ball in non-orthodox ways that I think is going to really, challenge some rim protectors at the NBA level, because he plays his game at a little bit of a different pace, a little bit of a different speed than most NBA guards. And I do think that's going to be a little tricky for NBA defenses to adjust to when he's on the floor. He's a perfect backup point guard candidate early in his career, and someone, even if you have enough talent around him, you could put him onto an NBA roster as a starter at some point soon in the future. I think he's ready. I think he's someone who, around the right talent, could have a really nice, well-defined role for you. Now, is he going to light the world on fire as a scorer? No, he's definitely not. He's not going to score 15, 20 points a game. What I'm looking at is a guy who can probably average 10 points a game with maybe 7 assists a game if utilized correctly as a starting point guard. And there is some real value to that there. I think he could be a nice spark plug off the bench as well. Physically, I want him to get into better shape. I want him to get a little bit more of an athletic profile. I think he needs to add a little bit into his lower body for explosiveness. But at this point, still Carlos Alocen, he's an intriguing prospect to me, and I like him more than most. Moving at 19, we got Isaiah Mobley here, another player who I really, really do like out of USC. He's been huge for the Trojans this year. They did just lose to Arizona the other night, and unfortunately could not win the Pac-12 because of that loss in the regular season. But the strengths here for him are obvious. Brother of Evan Mobley, and he's got some similar strengths. He can shoot the basketball. He's got really good length. And one thing I really like about him is he does not stop the basketball. He's got actually pretty good playmaking feel, can put the ball on the deck a little bit, can play him as a 5, as a stretch big because of his length. I think he can protect the rim enough, but he's also switchable out onto the perimeter for me a little bit. Now, I don't know how well he's going to handle some NBA athletes, but at least his length is going to help counteract that a little bit. And again, another player who I think you just put him onto a team, he fits well. He's going to make all the right decisions. He's going to knock down open jump shots, and that's huge. If you can find a 4-man who can stand, catch, and shoot, also put the ball on the deck, attack closeouts, maybe post him up a little bit. You can use him in a variety of areas. He's not the most athletic guy, but he makes up for that with size, length, and skill sets, and I think that's going to be a really nice pickup for a team. If he goes in the second round, that's a steal. For me, I could see him being a late first-round pick, especially by a team that maybe wants to try and steal Evan Mobley away in the future. You draft his brother now and see if you'd want to pair the two of them together, because Evan Mobley, of course, did follow in Isaiah Mobley's footsteps to USC. Isaiah Mobley's a junior now, was a sophomore when they brought in Evan Mobley, and I think that maybe a team would look at him as a way to recruit his brother in free agency down the road. That'll be an interesting storyline and narrative to watch as well. 18th, I've got Max Christie here out of Michigan State, another player I really like. He's struggled this year. He's only shooting about 38% from the field, 31% from 3, not a ton of minutes, and he's also, averaging less than 10 points a game. So for a player to not really have the best stat line, you have to be looking at the film, actually seeing what skill set he might have that I think could translate really well to the NBA. And for me, that's how he functions off the ball. He's really good at curling off screens, knows how to efficiently use his steps to get to the rim. And he's also a solid shot creator in the mid-range area, has a pretty solid handle to him. And that's really where the upside comes, is I think, outside of Michigan State, where they're not really letting him have the ball a ton, making decisions and making reads, I think he has the upside to become that type of player where if you put the ball in his hands, he can get downhill, can break someone down with his dribble, and get shots off into the mid-range area, which I think is huge. I don't think the mid-range area gets talked enough about in terms of how good of a player it can make you if you utilize it to your advantage. Look at what DeMar DeRozan's been doing. Not only this season, but throughout his career. He's one of the best mid-range assassins in the NBA. Max Christie, probably not going to be what DeMar DeRozan is, but there's shades of it to his game with his ability to knock down mid-range pull-up jump shots. I think he's not as fluid as a guy like DeMar DeRozan's been in his career, but what he does do well is he squares himself up to the rim and knocks down open shots. So I think there's going to be some real solid grabs for a team if they can grab Max Christie in the teens. Earlier in the draft process, I thought he could be a lottery pick. Probably has slid down into the early to mid 20s. I think is probably where he'll end up actually getting drafted. If he gets a little bit stronger and finds a little bit more of a consistent outside jump shot, I think he probably would move back up into that lottery discussion. 17th, here we got Nikola Jovic, and that is not a typo. I'm not talking Nikola Jokic from the Denver Nuggets. This is Nikola Jovic here, a Serbian wing who stands at about 6'9", and he is very well rounded. I think fits best as an offensive connector piece. Think Joe Ingles, but with more athleticism. Not quite the most athletic guy in the world, but with his length, he's a solid athlete. And his skill set is really based, his success will really be based around his skill set, because you look at a player here who can shoot the ball fairly well, not going to be the best shooter, not going to light the world on fire with his three-point shot, but you have to respect him a little bit. He'll knock it down if he's open. But what he's really good at is being a playmaker off the bounce. He also can get to the rim and finish with his height and length. I think he's someone who a lot of people probably don't know right now because he's coming from overseas, but Nikola Jovic is an extremely interesting and intriguing prospect for me, specifically when you consider how skilled he is at such a young age. Some passes he's thrown already in his career, playing in the U.S. In the U19 World Cup against the U.S., actually had a game against the U.S., and really showed some flashes in that one where I was like, wow, this kid has some special qualities to him that I do think will translate well to the NBA with space. I really like him. Kind of reminds me of Manu Ginobili a little bit. Not quite the flair as a guy like Manu, but at the same time, a very well-rounded player who can help you in a ton of areas. Nikola Jovic, I think he's going to find a ton of success throughout his career. Maybe not as much early as some of these other guys, but down the road, I think he's going to be a really nice pickup for an NBA roster. 16th, I've got Jeremy Sochan here out of Baylor. He's a freshman, and he's one of my favorite players in this year's class because of how dynamic he could be as a prospect. You could play him as a wing, could play him as a small ball center. There's a ton of flexibility with him. He's a defensive menace, though. That's where we really have to start. He's guarded a ton of bigs for Baylor. He's also switched out onto the perimeter a ton. Scott Drew there for the Baylor Bears, the head coach, has used him in a variety of ways. And I'm really excited about that because when you have a player who's as switchable, as hardworking, as competitive as Jeremy Sochan, who's a Polish-born player himself, it's something to get excited about. He's lengthy, but he's also mobile. You can put him out on the perimeter. I really think he's a player who could arguably guard 1 through 5 in the NBA, which is rare. That is absolutely insane and crazy, the fact that there's a player here that we're talking about being able to guard point guards and potentially centers. That just doesn't come around often, and his skill set really does lay itself out for that. And he's also a tempo pusher. He'll get a rebound and push with it. He can dribble the ball in transition. He can find others. He's selfless, and I think offensively could fit pretty well as an off-ball player, as a connector himself. The issues for him, though, is off the ball. What is he doing if he's not catching the ball, making a quick move, and creating for someone else? Because he's not the best shooter right now, shooting below 30% from 3 this year for Baylor, and let's be frank about it, his jump shot does not look the best. Mechanically, there's some things to clean up with that. And then also, what's his scoring output going to be? I just don't see him scoring a ton of points throughout his career. I think he has a long NBA career. I just don't see him being someone who really elevates you offensively at any point down the road. So even with all the defensive upside and all the awesome stuff he does on that end of the floor, I have to keep him out of the lottery just because of some of my offensive concerns. He had a huge game against Kansas and forced a ton of turnovers and did score a ton of points in that one. And maybe throughout March, if he continues to do that, we'll see a little bit more Jeremy Sochan. Maybe he drives up the board a little bit. But at this point, I see him as 16th, and I think that's pretty fair, just given the fact he hasn't really started games for Baylor, and he hasn't been, that dynamic of an offensive prospect. 15th now, I've got Keegan Murray here, someone who, again, I don't think is the most dynamic prospect, but what he does is get the job done. He's been huge for Iowa this year, even though his usage rate isn't as high as the number 1 player for a college team should be. And that's because he plays without the ball really well and does a lot of dirty work. Think Jared Vanderbilt here for the Minnesota Timberwolves. He is really, really good cleaning up the offensive glass. He's that perfect traditional filler 4, can step out to the 3-point line, And it's crazy right now because he's averaging over 22 points a game for the Iowa Hawkeyes. And I'm talking about him playing off the basketball because that's where most of his work gets done. Doesn't play with the ball in his hands a ton. He posts up a little bit. I don't necessarily see that being his strong point in the NBA, though. I think what he can do is space out to the corner. I think he's going to be able to crash the offensive glass. I think he's going to be a cleanup guy. And I think there's a ton of value here, actually. If you can get an athletic guy who's comfortable playing in that role, you'll put him next to a couple really good players and you've got business, because when you've got, one or two guys you really want to focus on scoring the basketball, putting ancillary pieces like Keegan Murray around him usually leads to a lot of success. So I think Keegan Murray could be a really nice pickup for an NBA team. Not the most skilled player. Certain players in this class might be more skilled, but I think Keegan Murray is more of a seamless fit next to some really talented players. For me, though, I think he's got to improve as a three-point shooter. Right now, I could see him being a corner shooter. I don't necessarily know if he has the range for the actual shot above the break at the NBA level three-point line. And then you're also looking at his passing. Only averages about 1.5 assists a game right now for Iowa. I don't know if I really believe in his capability to ever become a playmaker for others, which is kind of why I went with the Jared Vanderbilt comparison here for him. Vando doesn't do a lot of dribbling, kind of plays around the rim, dunker spot along the baseline. Keegan Murray's going to do a lot of that same stuff. So I think if you're looking at a player, and Vanderbilt's a really nice player. I'm not using that as to hate on Keegan Murray. Vanderbilt's been huge for Minnesota this season, and I think Keegan Murray could have a similar impact early in his career. 14th here, EJ Liddell, a player who continues to get better year in, year out. A junior now at Ohio State, and he has improved immensely again. He's been great offensively, but I think where his real strides have come are on the defensive end of the floor. He's up to averaging around 3 blocks a game right now for the Buckeyes, and that's really rare for a 6'9" forward like EJ Liddell. He's not the most physically imposing player, but what he has is great shot blocking timing, knows how to position himself defensively. He's a mastermind on that end of the floor. I really, really do believe in EJ Liddell, his capabilities on the defensive end of the floor. I like what he can bring. He also shoots the mid-range shot really well. He's been shooting the 3-ball well this season for Ohio State. Now, how does he adjust to the NBA three-point line? Again, another guy who I think early on is going to find a lot of success shooting from the corner. Think someone like Grant Williams, but also has more upside to him than a guy like Grant Williams because he protects the rim better, more athletic guy, and also someone who is more capable having the ball in his hands. But for me, I don't see an NBA team really wanting to utilize him frequently that way. Yeah, I think there's going to be, little wrinkles here and there where EJ Liddell maybe catches up as a face-up 4 sometimes around the mid-post area. But for the most part, I think he's going to have to adjust to playing a different role than what he's doing at Ohio State right now, where he's playing off the ball a little bit more similar to what Keegan Murray's doing for Iowa, is a role that I think EJ Liddell would fill at the next level. 13th here, I have Walker Kessler, an intriguing shot blocker who's been huge for Auburn this season, in a really great season for them. First time in school history they've been ranked number 1 this year, and Walker Kessler is the unsung hero there. Of course, Jabari Smith does take in a lot of that credit, and it's well-deserved, but Walker Kessler, he's averaging nearly 5 blocks a game. He's been absolutely massive for that team, and it's not just that he is long and lengthy. What the reality is here is he knows where to be. He has great defensive IQ, knows how to rotate well defensively, and is always protecting the rim. It seems like he has real anchor potential for an NBA defense, which gets me excited. And he also knows how to play within his role, shooting 70%, over 70% from 2-point land, which means he's taking smart shots around the rim and letting others create for him. And he's still, finding pretty decent statistical success. It's not like he's averaging 4 points a game with that 70% field goal percentage. He's taken, a higher volume than that, which means he's in the right spot, not only defensively, but offensively consistently. The issue for me here is how does he fit offensively, especially if you have a slashing style creator for your team, someone who likes to get to the rim, like a Ben Simmons or like a Russell Westbrook, for example, 2 examples off the top of my head there. For me, Walker Kessler, he just doesn't shoot a ton of threes right now, about 1 a game, and he's shooting around 20% from 3. So it's not something you can really rely on at this point, is Walker Kessler shooting the 3-ball. My hope for him would be that he can turn out to be like Brook Lopez is right now for Milwaukee. Of course, Brook Lopez back with the Nets was a little bit better of a post scorer and rebounder. Walker Kessler, for me, though, I think his upside lies if he can figure out a corner 3-point shot, how to space offensively, can play along the baseline, and then really act as that anchor defensively, providing top-tier rim protection, and also a guy who knows how to be an anchor defensively for a team coming up in screens. I think his length and size is really going to help him at the NBA level. Moving into 12, I got Kendall Brown here, another offensive connector type wing for me. This player screams Sacramento Kings now at this point, just with what Monte McNair's draft history's been. Last year took a Baylor Bear and Davion Mitchell. The year before, he took an Iowa State Cyclone in Tyrese Halliburton. Kendall Brown's another really, really solid, pure wing who can play make a little for others. That's really where I think the Sacramento Kings thing makes sense, especially with when you consider the fact that they targeted Domantas Sabonis because of his playmaking. What they clearly want is a lot of players who can play make and know what to do with the basketball in their hands. Kendall Brown is one of those guys. Attacks closeouts well, knows how to get to the rim, and I think is one of the more well-rounded players in this class with his ability to knock down some three-pointers. He's very athletic and also very lengthy. And for me, with Kendall Brown, the only question is, what's his long-term upside? Can he be an on-ball defensive stopper, or is he just more of a gap defender? Because right now, I think he's maybe a little bit more of a gap defender than a stopper. And then you also look at his offensive self-creation. Does he have any, one dribble, two dribble pull-up into his game? Does he have any bend or flexibility or fluidity? Right now, he's fairly straight-lined. If you cut him off, he's probably not going to change direction super well. I think he has to improve in that area. I think he's got to get a little bit more fluidity into those hips. But at this point, Kendall Brown, 12th best prospect in this class. And I mean, it's a really strong class. I would love to have Kendall Brown on my team. So don't take this as a shot at Kendall Brown, any of these criticisms, because every player has something to work on. I think Kendall Browns are pretty clear, though. Moving into 11, TyTy Washington, Kentucky Wildcat point guard. And he has really become their point guard. He's been a phenomenal playmaker for them this season, something where I think he's really improved throughout the course of the season. Of course, broke John Wall's single game assist record earlier in the year with a 17 assist game, which was absolutely massive for the Wildcats. He's found really good success in the pick and roll with Oscar Tshiebwe, where the two of them have connected in a bunch of different ways, both on mid rolls, soft rolls, and also when you look at Tshiebwe getting all the way to the rim. TyTy Washington has found really creative angles to get him the basketball, but I think what TyTy Washington does better than a lot of other guards at this point is score in the mid-range area. He's very comfortable operating into the 15 to 18 foot part of the floor, shoots them with confidence, shoots them with consistency, and that's been huge for his input as a scorer this year. My issue for him, though, is how does he adjust to the three-point line at the NBA level? Doesn't shoot a ton of deep shots at this point, and I think that, a player like him, I think if you're going to be a lead guard, you need to be able to shoot the three ball fairly well and somewhat consistently. TyTy Washington right now, that's really my biggest question mark about him. And also with his size and athleticism, can he be the head of a defense? Because I don't know if I see that. For example, Kennedy Chandler, I'd feel a lot more comfortable right now with him being my defensive point guard than a guy like TyTy Washington. But TyTy Washington clearly has better upside as a scorer to me, which is why I have them higher on my board. And I think 11th's a fair spot for him. I just don't know if I could see him getting into the top 10 with how good this draft class is. Number 10, I've got Hugo Besson here, and this one might shock a few people. He plays for the NBL. He plays for the New Zealand Breakers of the NBL, and he is a really good prospect. Last year, I was way ahead on Josh Giddey. I was telling everyone he's a lottery-level pick way before anyone else was. Everyone thought, well, he's a second-round guy. I was telling you guys well before that Josh Giddey is a first-round level player, and not only that, he's a lottery-level player. Again, Hugo Besson, another player here that I think should go in the lottery. Now, I'm not as sold that he'll go in the lottery as I was with Josh Giddey. I think what he will be, though, for sure is a top 20 pick. Because when you have a player like him who stands about 6'4", can play off-ball guard, can play with the ball in his hands as well, and really where he does his where he's the most effective is working as a shooter, not only as a standstill catch and shoot guy, which sure there's value for that, but he also can catch and shoot on the move. There's a lot of flexibility you can bring to an offense by being a movement shooter. Think Duncan Robinson for the Miami Heat and the contract he just got. The Miami Heat are really reliant on Duncan Robinson. I think Hugo Besson has similar upside as a guy like Duncan Robinson because of his ability to catch knockdown shots on the move. He's also able to finish shots while getting fouled out on the three-point line. He's also got some creation upside to him because he has a sneaky good handle, can get to the rim, has a wide variety of floaters and touch that he can go to. Offensively, he's a very polished and ready player. I am really excited about Hugo Besson. He turns 21 in April, and I think he's one of the more NBA-ready prospects at this point, especially on the offensive end. The only issue here with Hugo Besson is probably going to play him as a shooting guard. I would have to guess. I don't think he'll actually be a point guard, even though I think he can take some lead ball time because he's going to be able to dribble the basketball and create for himself and I think create for others a little bit. The issue, though, is defensively doesn't have the biggest frame. I don't know if he's going to be able to hang in there as well defensively. But at this point, I think the offensive upside for him is too immense to worry about some of the defensive limitations, especially if you have a decent rim protector behind him. Ninth, now I've got Jaden Hardy out of G League Ignite, a player who, at the end of the day, I could see him being a top 5 player in this class as well. But at the same time, I could see him being outside the top 20. There's really a lot of give and take here with this player because he's such a dangerous, confident shot creator. He's someone who feels like he can get a shot off at any moment. And to be honest, he can. I've watched him play a ton. He's someone who believes he should shoot 20 times a game. And I think there's some validity to that as well. He's improving as a playmaker, though, has a tendency to leave his feet too early when distributing the basketball. I think that'll hurt him. NBA development staffs are going to work that out of his game, though. He is a willing passer, but I think he definitely looks at himself as a scorer first. And that mentality is really good. Kind of reminds me of Anthony Edwards for the Minnesota Timberwolves. Now, Hardy's not as talented as Edwards, not as athletic either, but the potential is there to be a dangerous scorer with the basketball. The issue for him, most like a lot of other G League Ignite guys, is consistency. Right now, playing against NBA level talent, some of these players are this close to being NBA level players in the G League. It's definitely better competition than the collegiate level. He needs to find a little bit more consistency, isn't shooting the basketball as well, but he does have some deep range to him as well. He's not afraid of the moment, that's for sure. And defensively, I mean, he's too athletic and too talented of a player to be as poor of a defender as he's been this year. I think a lot of it's about IQ and positioning on that end of the floor. I think you're going to require some really good coaching to make Jaden Hardy work. But I think there's a few places that really do make sense for him in the top 10 where they could pull a lot out of him and make him a really, really nice pickup. Number 8, we've got Jalen Duren here. Another player I'm actually really high on, even though he's at 8, and some people might even have him near the top 5. For me, the only reason he's not in the top 5 is because of how strong this class is. He's a player who I think is clearly the best center in this year's class, given the fact that he's a 6'10" athlete who can jump out of the gym, very comfortable catching lobs, plays to his game, which is rim running. He's also got some playmaking upside to him. One thing that he does really well is playmake for others. You can use him as a 2-man game high-low. You can use him as a mid-roll post or a mid-roll pick-and-roll guy, get him the ball around the free throw line, and let him look opposite corner. He's going to be able to make some of those reads. He's going to be able to toss up a lob for an athletic wing cutting off the baseline. There's some real potential here, and he can also protect the rim with good flexibility and versatility switching out onto the perimeter. A team that drafts him is going to look at Bam Adebayo as a similar comparison. Now, does Jalen Duren get to Bam Adebayo's level? I'm more skeptical of that. I think Bam Adebayo is a more skilled offensive player than Jalen Duren, but I think that the comparisons are fair, and I can understand why those would be the comparisons, especially when you look at a positive outcome for Jalen Duren. I do think some of those comparisons do make sense. The issue for me, though, is he just doesn't shoot the ball right now, and he doesn't have a back-to-the-basket game currently as we speak. If he wants to become an all-star level player, I think he's going to have to add those two things into his repertoire. But at this point, I mean, it's clear that this kid wants to be competitive. He's a beast on the boards. He's a man amongst boys in a lot of Memphis's games. And I think he's going to be a really intriguing player, especially if he gets used correctly. Number 7, AJ Griffin, a player who has risen up my board. Last time I had him ranked 10th. Now he's at 7. And that's a massive jump to move up 3 spots in the top 10. And I think it's clear why. He's moved to the starting lineup for Duke, and his scoring's gone up, his usage has gone up, and he's got a really good skill set that the NBA is craving. He's a 3-and-D wing with physicality, can play the 3 or 4 position. He's athletic enough and skilled enough to be the 3, but he's physical and strong enough to be the 4. And his athletic upside is immense. He is someone who, if you think about DeAndre Hunter or Patrick Williams, who are both former number 4 overall picks, AJ Griffin compares fairly similarly to them. And his shooting upside is immense as well. Right now, shooting about 4 attempts from 3 a game for Duke. He's making 1.9 of them. So for our mathematicians out there, that's around 49% from 3 this season. He's shooting nearly 50% from the 3-point line. That's how good he's been. The issue for me, though, is he's got to be a little bit more assertive. He's only averaging about 7 shots a game, currently, despite being Duke's second or third best player, in my opinion. So I think he's got to be a little bit more aggressive. We'd see that efficiency probably drop a little bit, but right now, with where his efficiency's at, he can afford to drop his efficiencies a few points by having a little bit more output and being a little bit more aggressive with the basketball. I think he's not going to be the best ball handler on day one, but if you want to play him as a 3 or 4, you can get away with that, especially early in his career. 6, I've got Johnny Davis, and I know Johnny Davis is someone who has a ton of fans, and it's well-deserved. He's a really great player. For me, I think some scouts could be looking at him as a top 4, maybe 5 player in this class as well. I have him just outside the top 5 at 6 for a couple of reasons. Let's get to his strengths first, though. One of the better shot creators in this year's class. He can do it against tight coverage, can do it against bigger defenders, loves to operate against smaller defenders, though. He's a very strong all-around player. Defensively, he's going to leave an impact on the game. He's competitive. He wants to win. He's been a huge part of Wisconsin's success this year. And Wisconsin, who is maybe aiming to have a down year, I don't think they really expected themselves to be where they're at currently. Johnny Davis is really the biggest reason why with their upset win, most recently over Purdue. Defensively, he's a dog. Offensively, he's a dog. I believe Johnny Davis can be a really good player in the NBA. The issue for me, though, and the only reason I have him outside the top 5 is how does he fit off the basketball? Right now, he's a little bit of a streaky three-point shooter, and a lot of his three-point attempts do come off the dribble. So for me, if he's playing off the ball, how efficient is he going to be as a spot-up guy? And then how do teams view his upside? Because if teams look at him and say, well, this will be our lead guard, this is going to be the guy we want to put the ball in the hands of, then I think he's a phenomenal fit. But I think if a team's like, well, we could see him being a really good contributor off the wing, but maybe not our go-to guy, then that's where I have some more questions about, well, how efficient is he going to be off the ball? How much does he want to have the ball in his hands? He deserves to have the ball in his hands, which is why I have some of those questions. For me, though, a very talented player and someone who's going to work really well in the NBA. Number 5, I've got Bennedict Mathurin here from Arizona, a player I am absolutely in love with. When you consider what this player is, think a combination of Mikal Bridges for the Phoenix Suns and Tim Hardaway Jr. for the Dallas Mavericks. He gets a ton of height on his jump shot. He's a very vertical player. He's extremely athletic, and he's one of those prototype 3-and-D wings at about 6'6". He's willing to guard the best player. He's also really good when he's not guarding the best player. As a gap defender, I think he's someone who is going to jump a ton of passing lanes. He's extremely athletic, quick with the ball, and he's also got a lot of upside as a ball handler and shot creator. He's not afraid of taking mid-range jump shots. He's really good at getting to the rim, finishing through contact, and he's athletic enough to punch a couple home on you as well. Mikal Bridges is really where I see a lot of that too, with a player who can play on the wing, can guard on the ball, can guard off the ball, is lengthy, knows how to play into a role. I mean, Bennedict Mathurin is one of the better players for me in this draft because of his versatility. You could use him in a ton of different ways, and I think no matter which way you use him, he's probably going to be successful. I really, really like what he's going to be for an NBA team. Again, another sophomore who I think is just taking a massive stride forward from his freshman to sophomore season. I like what he is. Maybe he's not going to be a star player in the future, but I think he's going to be a really, really good piece around good players. And then I think the thing to watch for is if he can become a consistent on-ball stopper, that's really where he takes the next step forward. Right now, I think he's better as a gap defender. I know he's willing to take the challenge as an on-ball guy, but I think he has to have some technique improvement with his ability to use his body to cut off driving lanes as an on-ball defender. But other than that, I mean, Ben Mathurin, I love his competitive nature. I love his ability to make big plays, and he's a highlight reel too. So for me, Bennedict Mathurin's fun to watch, and I think he's also going to be a really productive player in the NBA level. And now we get into that top 4 where it's really, really widely diverse in what people believe. For me, Paolo Banchero, I think he's starting to cement himself as the number 4 guy in my eyes, barring a crazy March Madness where he just goes insane. What he is a mid-range assassin who has a sneaky handle and can lull a guy to sleep. Defensively, with his offensive capabilities, he's tough. He's a tough cover. Really uses his jab step well. Reminds me of New York Knicks version of Carmelo Anthony, with his ability to get to the rim, his ability to, in the triple threat in the mid-range area, scare people with his ability to get to the rim. He's physical, strong. If he beats you to a spot, he's finishing the layup. I don't know if he's the most athletic player in the world. He's not very quick. That's my one big concern for him, is his quickness. Also with the ball, when he actually makes a move, he's not the quickest guy, but also his processing speed. He stops the ball a little bit, and Granted, for Duke, he's the best player, so I understand why they want the ball in his hands, why he's stopping the ball, but I am worried that that will carry over to the NBA a little bit too frequently. But at the end of the day, he's a player who I can see averaging 20-plus points a game relatively quickly into his career because he has that level of skill set. 6'10", 250 pounds. He's a tough cover, and I think he's someone who's going to find a ton of success in the NBA. Number 3 here now, this is going to be a little bit of a hot take for some people. I've got Jabari Smith. Now, I know some people are going to say, whoa, wasn't Jabari Smith number 1 on your big board in version 1? Yes, he was my number 1 prospect in version 1. I've made a little bit of a switch up, and it has nothing to do with some of Auburn's struggles. It has to do more with long-term projectability and upside. I know a lot of people look at Jabari Smith and say, next Kevin Durant. Can we please stop doing that? Jabari Smith's not going to be Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant's a top 20 player of all time. Okay, those don't just grow on trees. Yes, he's 6'10", he's lengthy, can dribble the ball a little bit, but he's not Kevin Durant. Okay, we did the same thing every single time there's a 7-footer coming from Europe with Dirk Nowitzki. We don't need to do it every time there's a 6'10" player who's, a shooting player who can shoot from the perimeter and also is a little bit wiry. We don't need to compare them to Kevin Durant. They're different people, they're different players. What he does do well is some of the similar things to Kevin Durant in terms of shooting the basketball. He's a really great three-point shooter. He's also a really good scorer, and he's going to be a really good perimeter defender. I think he's a better perimeter defender than Kevin Durant. For me, when you look at what he can be on that end of the floor, he's got a really good wingspan, and he also gets into a really athletic stance and bends his knees really well, which is tough to do for a player of his length and size. But he gets down into a stance, and he can stop guys. He's also someone who I think his length's going to bother offensive players. And he can also keep himself in place from the weak side, come over and get a couple blocks. Him and Walker Kessler are impossible to score on at the rim, it feels like, for Auburn. And Jabari Smith, I think, defensively does have some good upside as well. But when you consider why he's not Kevin Durant, I don't think he plays through contact nearly as well as KD does. I don't think he has quite the bounce Kevin Durant has, at least when he was healthy. And then you also look at the dimensionality. Kevin Durant can get any shot off at any point he wants. Jabari Smith, I don't think, is quite as fluid. Kevin Durant is one of the best offensive players the league has ever seen. Jabari Smith, I think there's some upside there. I think he could be one of the best offensive players in the league someday, but I don't think of all time that he could be the best or one of the best offensive players, simply because I don't think he's going to be able to be as deadly in every single spot of the floor as Kevin Durant. So I'm not harping on Jabari Smith here. He's a great player. I think he's neck and neck with the other 2 guys I have above him, but I have him 3rd by a slim margin. You could consider this a 1C if you want. Moving on to 2 or 1B here, I've got Chet Holmgren from Gonzaga. This kid's special. Okay, I know a lot of people are questioning, well, what does he look like against great competition? Is he going to get washed out by bigs in the NBA level? Probably early on, yes, which is why he should play power forward. Okay, a 7'1" guy who has his skill set, that is insane. Okay, his comparison is going to be Kristaps Porzingis, but he doesn't have injury history. He is so unique, so versatile, so flexible. It's crazy to me. His defensive upside is huge because he's someone who has really good shot blocking timing, uses his length and size to his advantage, but he's extremely mobile. He's going to switch out into the perimeter with ease. Think Evan Mobley, but a little bit taller. Yes, he's a little bit lighter than Evan Mobley. I think he does need to get stronger. I do think he needs to put on a little bit of weight. Currently, he's around 195 pounds. At some point, I hope he's around 220, which is 25 pounds. That's going to take a little bit. I think it's realistic that he could put on 10 to 15 pounds before the start of his rookie season, especially if he takes it seriously. But probably by the start of year 2 in his NBA career is when you could see him get around that 220-pound weight mark. I don't want to see him put on too much weight, like what happened with Mo Bamba. I think then you lose a little bit of that uniqueness in what Chet Holmgren is. But let's not overthink this, guys. He's 7'1", can dribble the basketball, can shoot it from 3 with ease, can also get downhill. He's one of the few players at 7'1" who can hit a crossover with one gather step and get to the rim from the 3-point line. He is a special talent. He's going to be able to hedge out onto screens well. He's going to be able to recover into the paint, keeps himself alive with that length defensively. Can he be the half-court scoring player like Banchero, like Jabari Smith? Probably not. He's probably not going to average 20-plus points a game in the NBA, but what he's going to do is average 15, 12, and 3 blocks, okay? And that's crazy. He's the perfect connector. to everything, not just offensively, but everywhere. He flushes out a team, and if you want to win, you draft a basketball junkie like Chet Holmgren. Might not have the numbers of Jabari Smith and Banchero, but I think ultimately, if you want to win a ton of games, Chet Holmgren should be your pick. Moving into 1, obviously, you guys know who it is now at this point. Jaden Ivey from Purdue, a player I am higher on than most. He is the best player in this year's class. I am very, very firm in my belief on that. But the more I see him, I'm sold. You know, Ja Morant 2.0, sort of. Maybe not quite the playmaker at this point of his development track that Ja Morant was. Of course, Ja Morant, his sophomore season at Murray State, averaged 10 assists a game. For Purdue right now, Jaden Ivey is averaging around 4. So, you know, the assists aren't quite there. But at the same time, Jaden Ivey isn't getting utilized the exact same way that Ja Morant was for Murray State. But what he does have the same as Ja Morant is the speed and quickness, the athleticism, his ability to finish around the rim. I mean, you guys saw him punch it over Ron Harper Jr. and Rutgers, right? Jaden Ivey took that game by the throat and said, we're not losing. He also had a huge 3 against Wisconsin. He's a gamer. He rises to the moment, and he fits the NBA perfectly. Be honest with me now. I'm going to ask you guys this question. If you could take a 6'10" face-up 4, a 7-footer who doesn't have a ton of offensive, you know, take the game by the throat capabilities, or you could take a guy who is a 6'4" guard who's a blur, can run the pick and roll, can get downhill. Oh, and by the way, he's averaging around 20 points a game almost. You take the 6'4" guard, okay, with this athleticism, very similar to Ja Morant. His jump shot's coming along. I mean, he is really, really talented. I'm blushing over Jaden Ivey. I think he needs to be the first overall pick, and you guys should take it from me. I was one of the few people who said Ja Morant should go over Zion Williamson. I said it then. I have screenshots of that as well. Sure, Zion Williamson's been really great when he's played, but he's played 85 games through 2.5 seasons. So I think it's fair to say that Ja Morant should probably have been the pick number 1 overall. And I think Jaden Ivey is going to be the same case of that. If a team takes him number 1, great. If a team gets him 2, 3, or 4, it's a steal. Jaden Ivey is going to be a special player. He's the lead guard of the future for an NBA team. I think he's got to tighten up his handle a little bit and be able to convert that a little bit more efficiently into, slow to fast change of pace game. And I think he's also got to, tighten up his jump shot a little bit. Kind of fluctuates with his consistency. But for me, Jaden Ivey, clearly the best player in this class now. At this point, I'm sold on Jaden Ivey. I know some of you might disagree. This class is great. I understand why. I'm sold on him being number 1, though, at least at this point. Maybe March, if he has a terrible March. Maybe we'll see if I switch that up. It's fluid yet, but for me, Jaden Ivey is my number 1. Hopefully you guys did enjoy today's video. If you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe as well if you're new. Thank you so much for watching. Really do appreciate it. And let me know your thoughts and comments down in the comment section. Of course, there's a lot you probably disagree with. That's why it's my opinion, my subjective thoughts on all 30 of these prospects in this video, plus Ron Harper Jr., who, again, another player I think probably rises up into my top 20 once I give it a little bit more thought into where I'd rank him. Thank you guys all so much again for watching, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.